1980s. Man, what a time to be alive if you loved metal. Iron Maiden was conquering stadiums. Metallica was rewriting the rulebook. Judas Priest was proving metal could be both brutal and beautiful. But here's the thing. For every band that made it big, there were 100 more grinding it out in dingy clubs, recording on shoestring budgets, pouring their hearts into albums that barely made a dent in the charts. They had the riffs, they had the fury, they had everything, except the breaks. And somehow, tragically, time just forgot about them. Well, not today. Today, we're dragging 16 of those forgotten warriors back into the light. Bands that deserved way more love than they ever got. This is WoodsRock. Manilla Road, USA. Epic. US power metal. Picture this. Wichita, Kansas. Not exactly the metal capital of the world, right? But that's where Manilla Road built their legend. One epic, mythical album at a time. Crystal Logic in 1983 isn't just a record. It's a journey. Sword and sorcery, mystical lands, battles between gods and men. Mark the Shark Shelton's vocals might have been rough around the edges, but that raw honesty, that's what made it real. His voice didn't try to sound perfect. It told stories. Their sound, a raw, muddy blend of 70s prog rock and proto-power metal, was too unconventional for major labels. In an era chasing glam polish and thrash aggression, Manilla Road went in the opposite direction. They ignored trends, built their own world, and in doing so became a pure underground fire. A cult legend whose influence only grows with time. Before the internet created niche communities, Manilla Road were the niche community. They weren't just playing music. They were building a handmade universe from Wichita. While LA bands sang about parties, Mark Shelton was your dungeon master, crafting intricate sagas on a 4-track. Their failure wasn't a lack of talent, but a rejection of the very idea of the mainstream. They weren't ignored by the industry. They were building a secret kingdom for those who preferred maps of Middle-earth to maps of the Sunset Strip. Think Manowar's epic vibe, but rawer, like a D&D campaign in riff form. And imagine a band that didn't need a label, just a vision, and a Xerox machine for their flyers. Cirith Ungol, USA. Epic heavy metal. You know a band means business when they name themselves after a fortress from Tolkien's darkest nightmares. Cirith Ungol took doom, fantasy, and fury, and forged something truly haunting. King of the Dead in 1984 wasn't just another metal record. It was a descent into madness, heavy, mystical, and absolutely chilling. Tim Baker's vocals didn't just sing, they screamed, soared, and summoned. His shrieking voice sounded like a man possessed by ancient spirits. The riffs? Monolithic. The atmosphere? Pure dark magic. In a decade increasingly defined by spandex and hairspray, Cirith Ungol's aesthetic was dank dungeon. Their album covers weren't sexy, they were frightening. Tim Baker didn't sing, he lamented. They were the antithesis of glam, embracing a raw, unpolished, genuinely weird persona. Their doom-laden, Sabbath-inspired sound was simply too dark and strange for the speed-obsessed 80s. The unpolished production, bizarre artwork, and refusal to chase trends kept them out of the mainstream. But that's exactly what made them special. They carved their own twisted path through metal's underworld, misunderstood by the masses, worshipped by those who got it. They were the band you discovered in a used bin and felt like you'd found a cursed relic. Think Black Sabbath meets Tolkien. Too dark, too strange, and way too real for MTV. Riot, USA Heavy, Power Metal. Before power metal even had a name, Riot was already writing the blueprint. These New York legends were crafting melodic masterpieces while everyone else was still figuring out what heavy metal even meant. Fire Down Under in 1981? Pure. Class. Energy, speed, and hooks for days. It had everything. But Riot's biggest enemy wasn't lack of talent. It was corporate sabotage. Capitol Records infamously refused to release Fire Down Under, calling it too heavy. Too heavy in 1981. That single decision crushed their momentum right when they were about to explode. Riot is a brutal case study in how business kills art. They weren't weird or niche. They had the anthems, the riffs, the energy to be as big as Judas Priest. But a suit in an office decided otherwise, snatching away their shot at glory. It's one of the most heartbreaking what-if stories in metal history. A band with all the right songs, all the energy, all the heart, but none of the luck. Think Iron Maiden's energy, but screwed over by suits. Savatage, USA, progressive power metal. Savatage didn't just play metal, they told stories with it. From Florida's underground came a band that turned heavy metal into theater. Hall of the Mountain King in 1987 was a masterclass. Technical shred, raw emotion, and dramatic flair, all fused into one breathtaking sound. John Oliva's voice could go from a whisper to a scream in a single breath. And Chris Oliva's guitar? Absolutely devastating. Equal parts beauty and destruction. Savatage were true pioneers of progressive power metal. But their ambition was their double-edged sword. Too theatrical for thrashers, too heavy for prog snobs, and too complex for the pop metal crowd. They didn't just write songs, they composed miniature metal operas. Caught between hair metal's glossy anthems and thrash's violent edge, they were a square peg in a decade of round holes. Too complex for radio, and too soulful for the charts. Instead of platinum records, they built a cult legacy, inspiring a generation that would later shape bands like Trans-Siberian Orchestra. Think Queensryche's Brain, with Manowar's heart. Voivod, Canada, progressive thrash metal. All right, strap in, because Voivod is where things get weird. From the cold depths of Quebec, these Canadian mad scientists took thrash metal and twisted it into pure sci-fi art. Killing Technology in 1987 and Dimension Hatros in 1988 didn't just sound unique, they sounded alien. Dissonant riffs, bizarre time signatures, dystopian lyrics. It was as if Metallica met King Crimson in a cyberpunk apocalypse. Most 80s thrash was about the here and now. Politics, war, society. Voivod? They were from the future. Their sound wasn't just technical. It was a deliberate deconstruction of metal itself. Hardcore punk energy, thrash aggression, and progressive rock experimentation fused into something both visionary and alienating. Too weird for Big Four mosh pits, too heavy for prog purists. That innovative complexity became their curse and their crown. Voivod never chased the mainstream. They escaped gravity, carving their own orbit in the cosmos of metal. Think Rust in Peace reimagined by space philosophers. Coroner, Switzerland. Technical thrash metal. Switzerland isn't exactly known for thrash metal, right? Well, Coroner made sure you'd never forget them. Often called the rush of thrash metal, and honestly, that's no exaggeration. Punishment for Decadence and No More Color were technical masterpieces, surgical riffs, jazz-infused bass lines, and precision few bands could touch. Their sound was too cerebral, too clinical, and way too intellectual for the raw, mass-market rage of 80s thrash. They prioritized tight composition and technical prowess over mosh pit chaos, a Swiss precision machine in a world of headbanging anarchy. If Voivod were the artists, Coroner were the engineers. Their music demanded you sit down and study it, not just thrash along. They were the band for the musician in the audience, the one who appreciated genius in composition more than the pit. Lacking major US label support, Coroner remained in the thinking man's thrash corner, admired by hardcore prog/thrash fans but largely overlooked while Metallica and Megadeth stole the spotlight. Think Megadeth's precision, but with a jazzy, European edge. Crimson Glory, USA, progressive metal. Chrome masks, operatic vocals, atmospheric, progressive metal that felt like a fever dream. That was Crimson Glory. Transcendence in 1988 bridged the gap between Queensryche and Dream Theater. Soaring, theatrical, and technically brilliant. Midnight's voice was otherworldly, a once-in-a-generation instrument, perfectly matching the band's mystic, epic vision. But those chrome masks, operatic vocals, and extreme theatricality, too alienating for radio, too strange for MTV's hair metal crowd. Were the masks a gimmick or a statement? They forced listeners to focus solely on the music, staggering technicality and operatic grandeur. Their ambition became their cage. Too perfect, too dramatic, too much. In trying to transcend the genre, they inadvertently placed themselves outside of it. The result? A beautiful, isolated monument, admired by those who dared to dream big, while the mainstream remained oblivious. Think Queensryche's drama meets Dio's mysticism. Satan, UK, NWOBHM. Yes, they were called Satan. And yes, that probably hurt their chances at mainstream radio play, especially during the satanic panic of the 80s. But who cares? Because Court in the Act in 1983 is one of the smartest metal records of the entire decade. Dual guitar harmonies, razor-sharp songwriting, and technical prowess defined NWOBHM at its peak, and Satan delivered it all. While Iron Maiden streamlined their sound for arena hooks, Satan doubled down on intricacy, interweaving guitar lines and complex structures into a thrilling musical journey. Their provocative name, combined with sophisticated riffs and ambitious arrangements, made them inaccessible to the masses. While peers found fame with simpler hooks, Satan stayed underground, admired by musicians and dedicated collectors who recognized their genius. Think Iron Maiden's skill, but too edgy, too clever, and too underground for the mainstream. Tank, UK, NWOBHM. If Motorhead had a scrappier, angrier little brother, it'd be Tank. Raw, loud, gritty. Filth Hounds of Hades, in 1982, captured the wild, untamed energy of early British metal. Algie Ward's bass, filthy. Production, rough. Attitude, absolutely ferocious. Tank's sound was too raw, too punk-infused, and too close to Motorhead to carve out a massive, unique identity. They were the perfect, unfiltered metal, the deep cut for fans who had already worn out their overkill vinyl. Their authenticity became a double-edged sword, brilliant but overlooked. In the scramble of early NWOBHM, Tank was the bonus track, a shadow, a secret reward for those who knew where to look. Lacking polish and a distinct market edge, they were quickly overshadowed by bigger, more accessible acts. Think Motorhead's rawness, but without the breakout hit. Leatherwolf, USA, heavy, power metal, triple, guitar, attack. That's right, 3 lead guitarists shredding at once. Leatherwolf's self-titled album in 1987 is a masterclass in melodic power metal, speed, melody, and class, all wrapped up in leather and chrome, slick with California production. But timing was against them. They hit the scene just as glam metal peaked, and their serious, technically focused sound was misclassified alongside LA's hair bands. The triple guitar attack was both their glory and their curse, a live spectacle that left audiences in awe, but confused. Were they a shred band? A melodic metal act? Who knew? This mislabeling kept true metalheads from discovering them, leaving Leatherwolf as one of the unsung heroes of the 80s. Think Judas Priest's Power, but lost in the glam haze. Anvil, Canada, heavy metal. Before Metallica, before Slayer, before thrash even had a name, there was Anvil. Metal on Metal in 1982 was ahead of its time. Fast, aggressive, and uncompromising. Lips and Rob were out there melting faces while everyone else was still figuring out power chords. Anvil pioneered the speed and aggression that would later define thrash. But bad management, poor distribution, and a string of unlucky breaks kept them in the shadows. They inspired future legends, yet struggled to get the recognition they deserved. A heartbreaking story of almost that became immortalized in their famous documentary. Their journey shows the brutal randomness of the music industry. For every Metallica, there's an Anvil, just as talented, grinding away in the dark. Think Metallica's raw roots, but without the fame. Witchfinder General, UK, Doom, NWOBHM. If Black Sabbath invented Doom, Witchfinder General cranked it to sinister new heights. Death Penalty in 1982 was heavy, slow, sinister. Occult imagery dripped from every riff, every lyric, every album cover. Raw, unpolished, and unapologetically dark. Their Sabbath-inspired pace and scandalous visuals were too fringe for the speed-obsessed 80s. Doom metal wasn't cool yet, not until the 90s, leaving Witchfinder General buried deep in the underground. Yet their influence is undeniable. They were essential architects of modern doom metal, planting seeds that would bloom decades later in stoner and doom scenes, long after mainstream eyes had moved on. They weren't trying to be on the radio. They were scoring a nightmare. Prophets without honor in their own time. Think Black Sabbath's Doom, but too dark for the 80s. Jag Panzer, USA, US power metal. From Colorado came Jag Panzer, dropping ample destruction in 1984, a cult bible for American power metal fans. Harry, the Tyrant, Conklin's vocals, stratospheric. The riffs, razor sharp and precise, slicing through the metal landscape like a blade. But here's the catch. They only released one album in the 80s. Limited distribution and a fragmented output kept them from breaking into the top tier of US power metal acts. That single record is worshipped by diehards. Yet the lack of momentum meant Jag Panzer remained a cult secret, overshadowed by bigger acts like Queensryche. And that's exactly why the myth persists. Ample Destruction exists as a perfect, contained explosion of American power metal. A single data point suggesting an entire universe of potential that never fully emerged. The scarcity created legend, turning them into the Bigfoot of US metal. Everyone had heard the stories, but few had actually heard the music. Think Dio's vocal power, but stuck in obscurity. Omen, USA, US power metal. Battle Cry in 1984 was the sound of warriors going to war. Galloping riffs, epic choruses, swords and sorcery artwork straight out of a Frazetta painting come to life. Omen brought pure, unfiltered glory to the metal scene. They were masters of atmosphere through simplicity, letting riffs and warrior ethos speak louder than words. That galloping rhythm, the literal sound of charging cavalry. They were a staple on Shrapnel Records, but without consistent major label backing, they couldn't compete with the larger-than-life images of peers like Manowar. Despite releasing 3 highly influential albums in the mid-80s, Omen remained a strong second-tier cult favorite, their epic anthems echoing only for the faithful. They didn't scream about greatness. They simply were great. Think Manowar's epic spirit, but without the hype. Exciter, Canada, speed metal. You want speed? You want adrenaline? Heavy Metal Maniac. In 1983 didn't just play metal, it invented speed metal. No frills, no subtlety, just pure, raw, sweat-soaked energy. Exciter laid the foundation that would ignite the Big Four thrash bands, but they themselves stayed raw, fast, and unpolished. They couldn't transition into the later, more technical thrash era, and sadly, the bands they inspired often got the commercial glory. Their legacy? That of a catalyst, the prototype, the spark, the blueprint for chaos. They were the band for those who craved pure, unfiltered velocity, a living fossil of metal's most explosive moment. Think Slayer's Speed, but without the spotlight. Warlord USA, epic heavy metal. Warlord gave us just one release in the 80s, the Deliver Us EP in 1983. But wow, what an impact. Majestic riffs, soaring theatrical vocals, a sense of grandeur most bands could only dream of. Their rarity, minimal output, and early breakup turned them into a collector's secret, revered by underground fans, but invisible to the mainstream. They weren't just a band, they were a rumor, a legend whispered among tape traders before the internet even existed. That single EP cemented Warlord as a cult legend, too epic for the 80s audience to fully appreciate. Think Manowar's majesty, but a hidden treasure. From the plains of Kansas to the streets of London, from the frozen north of Canada to the sun-soaked coast of California. These were the other heroes of 80s metal. The ones who didn't get the MTV rotation. The ones who didn't sell out arenas. But the ones who poured their souls into every riff, every scream, every note. Time may have forgotten them, but we haven't. So tell me, which of these bands do you think deserves a comeback? Drop your favorite in the comments. Hit that subscribe button, and keep the metal alive. This is WoodsRock, where classic rock and heavy metal never die.